Good evening. I'm James Brown. I'm chairman of the Parks and Cemetery Commission for Shrewsbury. Tonight is a meeting of the Parks and Cemetery Commission on Tuesday, August 28th at 6 p.m. Shrewsbury Town Hall in the Selectmen's Meeting Room. Then we will adjourn and head over to the old Selectmen's Meeting Room at 6:45 to conclude our Parks and Cemetery Commission meeting. Tonight we're having a presentation by BSC Group of the 4 Parks Master Plan, which includes Dean Park, Maple Ave, Municipal Drive, and Lake Street Park. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff with BSC Group, and he will take it from there.
Thank you. Again, I'm Jeff Faster with the BSC Group out of Worcester. We're a consulting firm, landscape architects, civil engineers, almost anything to do with site design and development. Also joining me tonight is Steve Camuso, who's been part of this project since the beginning, and happy to be making this presentation to kind of the conclusion of our study. You'll see at the end of this, we'll be packaging things up into a report for everybody. But it's been great working with staff. Thank you for all your input, as well as the commission who attended the meetings and provided some input also. So I'm going to quickly go over what this study was all about, and then we'll get into the parks and with the recommended improvements. So we looked at 4 sites, as was mentioned earlier: Dean Park, Municipal Fields, Maple Ave Fields, and Lake Street Recreation Area. And this graphic shows that as part of the process, we did have public meetings to get public input on the various sites. And that was very helpful in helping us understand some of the issues at the parks, as well as the improvements that are being requested by the community, especially the different sport leagues and groups that use the different parks. Again, 4 parks. Dean Park, and we looked at everything within the parks, but we're really focusing on the existing facilities. So at Dean Park, it's a very large park, 79 acres, but quite a few ball fields there, 5 ball fields, picnic, a couple pavilions, courts for tennis and basketball, playground area, restrooms, large pond, walking trails throughout the facilities. There are a couple buildings in the park. We did look at them in a very general way and got community input on the condition and what they'd like to see happen with some of these buildings, but we did not do an in-depth evaluation of the buildings. Maple Ave is about 20 acres, has a softball field, 3 natural grass soccer fields, some of them overlap with the softball field, and a parking area. Dean Park also has parking areas. Municipal Drive, only 5 acres, 1 large multi-purpose field area used for a number of different purposes. And Lake Street, a rather large site, 28 acres, it's only partially developed with multi-purpose field areas and a walking trail. The purpose of this study was, again, to look primarily at existing facilities at these different parks. Another main concern, looking at existing facilities to determine what upgrades were needed. Also, accessibility was a major part of the study, improving access to, as best we could, all, or recommending improvements to improve access to all facilities in the parks. And also importantly, providing cost estimates for the recommended improvements so that the commission can start to plan ahead and prioritize the just different improvements they'd like to see and what stage they'd like to kind of undertake those over the next number of years. And that's something we want to talk about later on tonight, is the phasing. When we did our public meetings, we let people know the different things we were looking at within the park, and here's a listing of some of those just to let them know what we're talking about when we're talking about existing facilities. And it can be related to circulation, could be related to infrastructure. Pretty much everybody understood it related to the athletic facilities, whether it be fields, courts, playgrounds, picnic areas, etc. And then we asked people for input on their needs regarding all the existing facilities. And we also asked if there were additional facilities or changes they'd want to see in facilities. Certainly they're welcome to bring those up. But again, it was made clear that the primary focus of the study was how to improve the existing facilities at the parks. So I'm going to walk through the different parks and describe in a general way the proposed improvements and show you the overall cost for those improvements. I guess you can interrupt as you would like, or we can wait till the end and then I'm happy to answer questions. So the first site we're looking at is the Municipal Drive Fields. So this is Municipal Drive here, the field area is down here, and there's a school across the street where a lot of people park to use the fields. It's a slightly different orientation. Again, Municipal Drive here, the school here, and this is a diagram showing the recommended improvements. And I'll start with the parking area over here to improve parking for ADA parking. So handicap accessible parking with an accessible route onto the fields. We're showing a perimeter walkway around the fields, as well as improving the walkway that exists now to the budding neighborhood. For the fields itself, we are showing an expansion of the field area. In this direction here, there are calling for some minor clearing of existing vegetation, but primarily fixing some of what were called the sinkholes in the back part of the field area, depressions that really inhibit the use of that area of the grass field now. Fix those up so it does become a usable area, and that expands the amount of playable area on the field. The fields are used for soccer, for cricket, and maybe some other.
The school uses it for phys ed.
And phys ed by the school, and maybe some other occasional uses. So we're showing, again, with a larger field area, we have a diagram here that shows how it could be striped for different field uses. When it comes to soccer, it could be larger fields or smaller fields, but more fields will be able to fit on there. And also, we're showing the larger area being of use for cricket, which is played there now. But what we are suggesting is with the larger field area, pushing the cricket pitch more to the center of the area, so there's a larger playing area for cricket. And the other thing that's part of the recommendations is to put in a synthetic pitch for cricket, because that gets a lot of wear and tear as they play their game. So if it's synthetic turf, it's easier for them to maintain it. It's easier for them to get up and playing sooner, as opposed to putting out materials there that kind of protect the pitch area. So it makes it much more usable for that use. But at the same time, we placed it and expanded the field area around it so that, again, soccer fields can still go in and be used around the pitch area, which obviously you don't want that synthetic turf as part of the soccer field. Other improvements recommended, including improving the perimeter fence, especially on this side here where there's a stream, and just help control balls that would fly over in that area and potentially be lost. We also recommended improvements outside the park area itself, and that's mainly an improved sidewalk and crosswalk to the school, since a lot of people park here. And you'll see in the cost, we've separated that out. I think that covers most of the recommended improvements. Oh, and then for this park, as well as all parks, we have what are called allowances as part of the cost estimate. Those are sports equipment features or added costs for the improvements that you may or may not have to purchase, such as soccer goals. Another thing that's included in those are batting cages or I'm sorry, I don't know the proper term for the cricket cage, but to practice for cricket also. So we've kind of got that separated out as a cost. So we've got the basic costs of improvements and then additional costs should you need them or want to improve the equipment in the park. So for Municipal Field Drive, we have the base cost of $650,000. And I should also say that these costs include what we call soft costs. So these are the costs for constructing the recommended improvements. They are costs for what we call the soft costs. So if there's any permitting or engineering or landscape architectural services required to put this to bid, that's included with this number. And we also include what's called the contingency of about, I think we included 20% on this, because this is so preliminary, there are probably things that may crop up that we weren't aware of, so we always put a contingency in there, a little buffer for expenses. So in this case, $650,000 to do the basic field improvements, the fencing, the parking, those things. Irrigation is about $100,000 for this site. And then again, these allowances, which could be a number of different things, again, goals, benches, and in this case, we've included the sidewalk from the field along Municipal Drive and the crosswalk over to the school in this cost here, because it's really outside the park, but you may want to consider that at some point. So that would be the cost of improvements at this site.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
What's the timeline for the improvements on this park?
We're going to get to that later. There is no timeline right now.
And Jeff, just a
Yes,
question from you.
sure.
So, as part of your master plan, these are all items that can be segmented. You're not saying that if the town decides to go forward, that they have to be done in concert, they can all be done.
You will have itemized cost estimates in the final report we're providing to you, so if you want to pull out specific items, you can. For municipal, we really felt, because it's the smaller site, once you get in there, we feel this is really the base project right here. Now, you could take things out of that if you wanted to, but really felt that was what you'd want to do to be most efficient, to get in there and do the basic improvements one time. Again, irrigation I know was important, but that's something that could be added later because it's quite a cost. And that's something that can easily, irrigation contractors are familiar with easily trenching and getting things in and repairing turf after that. So that's something that could be done later. And again, these are optional things. Excuse me. There are some elements in this that you could segment if you wanted to. This includes the handicap parking area, which is a small amount of money. It's basically paving that area where they would park and a paved path from there to the pathway that would go around the park. It's a little bit of a cost savings, but that could be segmented out. But I think when it comes to the field itself, you'd really want to go in and do everything.
Okay, thank you.
The next site we're going to talk about is Lake Street Park. And this is a picture of the existing condition, what's there now. Lake Street's here. The park is in the back area here. And this is the SAC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, up front here. So this shows the proposed improvements, and here we started to recommend some phasing of improvements. So as part of the base improvements in this site, we're talking about improvements to the existing multi-purpose field here, and that includes, as with municipal, removal of some of the abutting vegetation to expand the area of the field slightly, doing a complete rehabilitation of that field area. It's poor condition, and it's a large field area, so that's a significant expense. And then the parking area, which is now a large gravel area. Let me see if I can go back. No. Right now, this is the parking area, but it's large gravel area. And people park there, but it's not an organized parking, so it's not used very efficiently. But in this improvement, we are paving it, we are striping it, we're organizing it, so you can probably park about the same number of cars, but it takes up a lot less space to do that. And then, as a second tier of improvements, we are showing in this area over here, taking part of this existing meadow and adding 2 softball fields, as well as enlarged outfields if you want, for a multi-purpose field, so it would have a variety of uses there. And then the last phase would be construction of a new entrance road into the park. Right now, the entrance road is over here, and there's some sight distance problems here, entering and exiting the park. This has much better sight lines. It's a much safer entrance and exit into the park, and gets it away from the SAC entrance to their facility. So it kind of minimizes that confusion. Did I miss anything, Steve? That's it?
Jeff, so sorry, before you move off that picture, I believe that there's some walking trails in the back behind that park. Was that a part of this, or was that, because that's existing, that was,
Right, that wasn't really part of the project.
okay, fair enough.
Yep, right, there are some existing trails, but we're adding additional trails primarily to provide ADA access to
Okay.
them.
Thank you.
Quick question, so what, the Lake Street Park right now, what are the activities that are happening in the existing field?
What activities are there now? It's
Soccer is there and lacrosse.
Are there any plans, I think that's what we wanted to find out was for cricket expansion?
Sorry, I went too far back. Nope, I went too far forward. Going the wrong way, sorry. I mean, again, it's a large field area that's there now, it's being expanded. It's just a matter of how it would be striped for various uses. Certainly, there's an area there for cricket, there's space there.
There is a potential
Yes.
Yeah, we're gonna have a question and answer period after, so we kind of want to go through the whole project
But
first.
yes, we
Yeah.
did. We organized the
Yeah.
parking to create more field space.
Gotcha.
But at this point, we haven't decided, because this is the first time we've seen the master plan, where we're going to allocate our resources and which sports will be on which fields. And so,
Thanks.
So costs here, see a much larger magnitude here, about 2.1 million for those basic improvements, which would be upgrading the existing field area, expanding it, improving the parking there, so there's some drainage improvements associated with that. And then irrigation is part of this number in this. Again, that could be separated out, but we felt it was important for this site. And again, there's an allowance for additional equipment if you want to go there. Then the softball field area with that enlarged outfield would be another about $1.5 million, again with some money or items listed as allowances. And then the new entry road, $220,000 there. Again, on this one, we tried to break this down into logical components. If you were to break down this initial one into a smaller component, you really have to condense the parking before you put money into you should before you put money into a large field. I don't know if it makes sense to spend money on parking before you spend money on fields. You could certainly shrink the parking area, but keep it gravel, which would save that expense. Again, but you'll have these things listed out in the cost estimate. I'll keep going. Maple Ave. This is Maple Ave here. The town hall complex police is over in this area here. The UMass facility over there. And this red line, which might be a little difficult to see, is the outline of the park area. Right now, have softball field here and the loop road going around this large field area and some field area over here for soccer, primarily used for soccer. For Maple Ave, we proposed 2 levels of improvements. One is fixing up what's there now, and that includes improvements to the field areas on both sides of the loop roadway. It includes improvements to the parking area, just basically, it's a gravel, basically, new gravel surface to that. It includes reversing the flow of traffic on the loop roadway, so keeping it one way, which some people don't adhere to properly right now. So we're proposing some minor improvements to make it a little more difficult to go the wrong way. So right now, this is the entrance, you loop around and exit here. We're proposing that be changed and you enter here. Part of that reason is there's a nice stone entry gate there, historical, and it would be hard to change that, so we want to have one point of entry through that stone gate. But on this other side over here, there was room to expand it. So what we propose there is, as you exit Maple Ave, there There'd be a widened exit drive, and in the middle, there'd be a small island. So as you exit, you could go to the right or to the left, but there'd be a small island in the middle of that exit. So if anybody was trying to come in, there's an island right in the middle there. There could be a sign in that says, "Do not enter one way," as a way to encourage people to use the roadway system in the correct direction. I think that's the major elements on this more modest improvement. So again, you can see here, overall improvements. Here we separated out irrigation. That's there now, but this will be expanded to the fields on the, closer to the town hall complex. And then the allowance for furnishings and equipment. The more aggressive improvements for Maple Ave include relocating the drive, which is in here, and pushing it over closer to the town hall complex at the edge of the wooded area there, so that the drive is around the perimeter of a large field area in the middle. And in moving it, we would also make it two-way, because we're constructing it, make it a two-way loop so that there's no confusion, which would cause that entry area over there to be widened. We'd have parking off of this loop road here, and then a large parking area in the back, and some overflow parking on some grassed areas here. But then you'd have this large grassed field area in the middle, and keeping the softball, but it could be striped for a number of different uses. Obviously, it's a large grassed area, could serve a number of different uses. One thing I forgot to mention on the modest improvement is we're keeping the roadway as it is, just changing the direction, but we're adding some pull-off parking off of that roadway and adding wood guardrail over on this side so that people don't pull onto the fields.
Does the modest improvement, does that include a repaving of that perimeter road?
No.
No, okay.
So again, this is more aggressive, so the costs go up. But here are our costs, and I don't need to repeat myself, but we did pull out the roadway costs from the field costs, but you have to do the roadway before you do the field, so even though they're separated, it's more for your educational purposes. Dean Park was the largest park we looked at, and because of that, we broke it into segments. So this is the entire, outlined in red, the entire Dean Park complex. Roads here, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the road.
Main Street.
Main Street's here. So primary access is off of Main Street. There were other access from a couple other points. The ponds here, the ball fields in this general area here, and wooded up towards the back there. So we broke it into 3 zones to focus in on the different athletic facilities in those zones. So there's a Zone A, which is primarily where the courts are. Zone B, which is where the baseball and softball is primarily. Zone C, where Little League and softball is. And then we have some other improvements outside that area. So this is Zone A. Again, it's the tennis courts, basketball courts, playground, parking. This is where the old park house used to be,
Yeah.
caretaker's house. And it butts up to the baseball field here.
You can move that back if you want.
We already did.
Oh,
I'm still
okay,
tripping over
okay.
it. Thank you. So improvements in this area include resurfacing the tennis courts. We feel the base is in pretty good shape, but the surface is in poor shape, so it's sealing the cracks, resurfacing, sealing, color coding, striping, and those types of improvements, as well as improving access into the courts so it's ADA accessible. Basketball, we're showing a complete reconstruction of the courts there. They're in much worse condition. For the playground area, in our opinion, it's not in need of immediate attention, but down the road, you're eventually going to need to upgrade the equipment and put in a new, what's called poured-in-place rubber surface there. We're showing some pedestrian improvements. One thing that came out through the public was a thought of somewhat of a decorative garden somewhere in the park. We're showing that here, but that's up for discussion. And down by the pond here, there's an old bathroom facility that we're calling for that, a removal of that because it's not used, it's in pretty poor shape, and having some picnic areas down there. So this cost about 1.3 million for the main areas, primarily going into the courts. And then allowances, this number is relatively high compared to other ones because it includes the surface and, the future improvements to the playground area. Nothing I need to do immediately. So Zone B is more in the central area. You've got the baseball, softball, the bandstand and bowl down here, a couple shelters, volleyball, etc. So in this area here, we're showing improvements to the fields, baseball and softball, including a new backstop for the baseball, moving it in closer to the field. One, to help minimize the fly balls that go over it and into the parking lot behind it. And there's also some drainage issues towards the current backstop location. So by pulling it in, we're able to get those out of the field to play and hopefully address them in other ways. We're showing some additional parking off of the existing loop roadway. We are proposing the addition of padding to some of the light poles because they're in the field to play, so it's a safety purpose. Upgrading the lighting there is also part of this. And this shows some pedestrian walkway improvements, but I'll get to that as part of the overall park improvements. But some of the walkways are associated with the fields themselves, and some of the walkways, these pink colors here, are associated more with a park-wide improvement to walking conditions. So when you look at costs, something that's associated with the fields are included in the field cost for that particular zone. This one's a bargain. Got irrigation there now. The fields need upgrading, but they're not in terrible condition. So it's more of a modest cost there. The third zone, Zone C, is down towards Maine. Little League, softball, includes this parking area at the upper level here. Proposed improvements, again, improvements to all the fields, improving access to the fields. Again, it's improved access, but it's also improving ADA accessibility to the fields. Kind of expanding slightly this parking area that's at the upper level to get some more spaces in within an area that's relatively flat. Otherwise, this is a fairly sloped area here, but kind of extending the parking and moving into that flat area there. And then doing a little reorganization of the parking that's by this Little League field across from the pond. It gets us a few more spaces, but it makes it more of a designated parking area as opposed to, it feels now you're pulling off the road. And with the small retaining walls that will be necessary for that, it helps improve access, ADA access at an upper level now to the fields here. Oh, and we're adding a picnic area, like a shelter there. So that it's kind of central to all the fields. Be a great place for families to congregate, especially if they have children playing in a few different fields. Again, field improvements, walkways, parking. Then we looked at overall in the park, there were some improvements that fell outside those zones, as well as this pedestrian walkway system that will be off the roadway. As we all know, people love walking through the park. And right now, they primarily walk on the roadway, which causes conflicts between cars and pedestrians. It's nice that a lot of the roadways have guardrails on both sides. It keeps the vehicles on the road and off the grass, but it also makes it more congested if someone's walking and cars are coming in both directions. There's only so far all three entities can go because of the guardrails on both sides. So we're proposing a pedestrian walking network that is off the roadway. So people will be able to walk pretty much anywhere in the park that they walk now, but they won't have to use the roadway to get there. So that's a major improvement for the park. We're also showing an area up here off of this newer upper level parking lot that's by the courts as a dog park. It's a wooded area now, and for the dog park, it's a fairly simple thing because it's a fenced in area with a couple amenities for dog park users. Oh, and then some entrance treatments and improvements, kind of highlight the park, add some new signage, and there was talk about aesthetic improvements to this main entrance, and then this entrance here, as well as the entrance on the far side over there, possibly installing gates so that entrance could be controlled if necessary. And certainly for this entrance here, that's rarely used, it's wide pavement now. That pavement would be narrowed so a vehicle could still drive down there, but it's not this wide expansive pavement. And these additional improvements, again, were primarily for the pedestrian walkway system. That's this number here. And then if you add all these numbers together for the different zones as well as the overall improvements, we're over $3 million. And I say plus or minus because we have those allowances in there. So next steps. We're going to be pulling together the final report, which will include all this information, the costs in very general terms as well as in detail, so you'll be able to see all the different elements if you decide to attack certain things. We will identify potential funding sources, and one of the things we need to do is identify priorities. And within the parks themselves, as you can see, when we broke out our costs, we separated out some elements that could be done as packages, but we didn't prioritize them within each park, and we didn't prioritize improvements in one park versus another park. And that's one of the things we need to talk about tonight, so we can put that into a report if you still want us to. Having worked in public sector for a number of years and done grant applications, sometimes it helps to say, here's a report we did, and this was our top priority, and that's why we want this grant money. Sometimes it hurts you if there's a grant source for priority number 10, and you say, here's our report, and it was 10, but you've got a great program to fund number 10, and sometimes they can backfire on you. So we could talk about that strategy tonight. So with that, any questions? And we can address them here or later on in the other room.
When you looked at the optional equipment, things, I'll use batting cages as an example. Did you take into consideration ADA requirements to, if you were to install a batting cage, making sure that that's accessible? Was that part of the pricing?
Yes.
It was?
Yep.
Okay, great.
It was pricing to the batting cages, pricing to bleacher areas, pricing for pedestrian access to batting cages, pedestrian access to bleacher areas, pedestrian access to dugouts.
Great.
On Municipal Drive, you said the irrigation was 100,000, did that include a well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I just wanted to answer, Mike had a question about the paving of Maple Ave, that's
Right.
something we've already had as a budget item.
Got it.
So,
Good, okay.
just,
Yes,
yeah,
obviously,
for what it's
in bad
worth.
shape.
Yeah, we know that.
Yeah, really?
We can put that in, but in its current condition, it's somewhat a speed deterrent.
It certainly is.
Questions, we could use some feedback on priorities from anybody, but certainly from the commission. If you want us to include that or not, or just, have this list of everything, and you may have priorities in your own mind, or you can address them at a future date.
Yeah, I think at this point, we'll absorb everything, when we meet, and we'll get back to you on how we want to prioritize.
Yeah, from my point of view, Jeff, so number one, thank you for all the hard work that you and your team did, right? Like, that's a very, very detailed report, and I know that you're gonna have some more details regarding the cost breakdown, but I think the summary that you provided has been excellent. It gives us the ability to talk amongst the commission ourselves, and again, to continue to poll the community to say, hey, what do you believe some of the things should be based on some of the information you provided here tonight? So I appreciate the work that you guys have done, and Steve and the rest of the team have done.
You know, we're working in another community where we've done a poll. It's called a Doodle Poll, right, is what we're using. It's available software out there for taking surveys, but they're using that to allow the community to identify priorities for some of the swimming pool that they're looking at. But that might be something you might want to consider here. It's a relatively simple thing to set up. He's the expert.
Let me know.
And then, again, we could talk about how we've packaged the different improvements to give you that overall cost. You know, we took the approach that this makes sense as a package for $1 million or $2 million or $1.5 million. If you want us to break that down differently, let us know for the final report. But just also so you know, we do a lot of park projects throughout the state. And some of these numbers may look high, but typical park rehab projects these days, they're rarely below $1 million, and we're typically in the $2 to $4 million range. And it's a lot of money, but that's what communities are putting into their facilities, knowing they have to do this comprehensive upgrade to whatever they have. Okay,
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
welcome.
Do you have any other? So do you want to add?
Yes.
So at this point, we're going to end this section of the Parks and Cemetery Commission meeting. We're going to head over to the old Selectmen room and continue with our normal meeting that continues on. But again, I'd like to thank everyone, the engineers who were involved, Parks and Cemetery, the Selectmen, the engineers. There was a big effort, including community members, different sports organizations. I'd like to thank everybody. Because as you can see, it's a big project, involves multiple sports, everybody has different ideas, dog parks, walking trails. So now we're going to absorb everything, and we will, have the town's input as well, citizens, different boards. So at this point, I would like to adjourn, and I'd like to thank everyone.
Yeah, quick question.
Oh, yes.
So, we just need to do this, so just trying to understand the process in terms of, when the commission meets again and, when the citizens get to give their input and the polls and all that.
Yes, well, our meetings are public, so you can attend any of them. We're once a month. They are advertised. And we are actually leaving here, the selectmen have a meeting, but we're heading over to our normal meeting room. And feel free, if you'd like to come and talk to us